The Guatemalan Genocide, also known as the Maya Genocide or the Silent Holocaust, is one of the more relatively unknown cases of systematic ethnic mass murder in recent history. Few in the West today have even heard about it, yet the consequences of this terror and violence still resonate in Guatemala today. What exactly happened in Guatemala in the 1970s and 80s that led to the brutal executions and slaughter of over 166,000 indigenous Mayan civilians? What led the Guatemalan military to conduct 626 massacres and admit to destroying 440 Mayan villages in a period of just 2 years between 1981 and 1983? And why were these actions supported by the United States government? And most importantly, why are the Mayan genocide survivors in Guatemala still protesting for justice and recognition to this day, even as recently as February 25th, 2021? To understand the context and history behind this atrocity, we have to look back towards the era of the Cold War. In the decades that followed the end of World War II, the United States was looking to gain a geopolitical edge over their newfound rival, that was the Soviet Union. American foreign policy in that era was focused on preventing any communist or socialist influence from taking roots in non-aligned third world countries, especially those that were in the US's backyard. Latin America was considered prime real estate for a battle of spheres of influence between NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Guatemala just so happened to be one of the nations that the United States decided to intervene in to maintain their power in the region. From the years 1944 to 1954, the Guatemalan Revolution took place, in which a pro-democracy uprising toppled the military dictatorship of Jorge Ubico, who was described as one of Guatemala's cruelest tyrants, who compared himself to Adolf Hitler. Ubico was known for working with the American United Fruit Company, now known as Chiquita Brands International, which had gained massive profits from exploiting laborers in Guatemala to grow their fruits. When Ubico was deposed in 1944, he was succeeded by new presidents in Guatemala's first democratic elections. The new leaders introduced minimum wage, near universal voting rights, and land reforms granting land to landless peasants. However, the United States government was alarmed by this political change and believed it to be communist. The United Fruit Company was also alarmed by its loss in profits and decided to lobby the government to persuade them to topple Guatemala's new democracy. After Dwight D. Eisenhower was elected as U.S. President in 1952, he authorized the CIA to fund, arm, and train a group of 480 men to coup the Guatemalan government in what was known as Operation PB Success. Led by Castillo Armas, the force invaded Guatemala on June 18, 1954, successfully seizing control of the government through psychological warfare and fear of a U.S. invasion. After Armas became the new president, he quickly obtained dictatorial powers, banning and imprisoning any political dissidents, as well as reversing the social reforms from the revolution. He was eventually succeeded by pro-US dictators. But in 1960, groups of Guatemalan leftist rebels, who were primarily ethnically indigenous Mayan and Mestizo peoples, began rebelling and started the Guatemalan Civil War. In the decades that followed, the Guatemalan military government resorted to increasingly brutal and ruthless tactics to root out any signs of what they thought was rebellion. In July 1970, Colonel Carlos Arana Osorio became the president of Guatemala. With the backing of the army, he organized death squads, torture, and disappearances of any potential rebels in Guatemala's countryside. He declared a state of siege, imposed a curfew, and began eliminating entire groups of suspected leftists. Bodies were found mutilated and displayed in Guatemala City's General Hospital for relatives to identify. Over the next few years, Mayan peasants, trade unionists, student activists, church leaders, and many more were routinely slaughtered by the military. Civilians were reported to have been beheaded, eroded, burned alive, beaten to death, or hacked to death with machetes. Even widows left behind after the massacres were left moneyless, without as much knowledge of farming as their late husbands, which also caused food shortages in the aftermath of the killings. Entire communities were essentially wiped clean, with hundreds of thousands of lives lost. US officials at the time were well aware of this taking place. The Guatemalan military was supported by US equipment and training, which experts say led to more deaths during the genocide. To this day, there is still an ongoing campaign by survivors of the silent Holocaust for recognition and justice in modern-day Guatemala. To this day, there are still pending court cases in Guatemala regarding the genocides, disappearances, and other atrocities committed against the Mayan people. As Mayan activists continue to march for justice, they wish for others to hear and remember their story. This is what was done.